And with that, I am happy to send this over to Ben Mintz from NEF to introduce our presenter.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Good morning. Molly, so I don't forget, thank you, and John and Jim for getting this organized today. I do appreciate that. Sometimes I forget at the end. I think the title really fits itself, and I'll just focus on the last part of the title, which is user-friendly software. I think ABB really prides itself in the thing that sets itself apart among other robot competitors is its software. So we're going to focus on that today. And the presenter that we have has been with ABB for 14 years now as a territory manager. So I think he has a pretty good handle on what he's going to present and how he's going to show you that user-friendly tool. But he's been in industrial sales and motion control for 28 years. He was in the ROTC in college, in the Navy. So he spent a couple years in the Navy, has his MBA. And Jim, I do appreciate you stepping in. I know our regular scheduled presenter wasn't able to make it today. So thank you, and look forward to your presentation.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah.
Okay, hopefully everybody can see what's on the screen. I'm going to talk today about Robot Studio and digitalization. So jump right into it. The time is somewhat limited for the number of slides that I have available, so I'm going to sort of cruise through some of this stuff. And if I touch on something that you want to learn more about, maybe we can do that at the Q&A or at the end if you want me to go back or talk about something in particular. But there's a lot to cover, and to some extent, this is going to be a mile wide and an inch deep where we're touching on all these things, but I'm not going to train you to be a Robot Studio expert or anything like that today. But I will mention some of the things that Robot Studio can do for you and what robot software in general can help you with. So what is Robot Studio? So Robot Studio is ABB's own offline programming tool for robots. It's been around for a long time. ABB is one of the oldest robot manufacturers in the world. We were the first company to create and market a servo-controlled electric robot. And Robot Studio has not been around quite that long, but almost as long. With the advent of computers and graphic technology, Robot Studio is it's a great tool in your toolbox. One of the bars to adopting automation is that you may not be a robot programmer. You may not have somebody on staff who's a robot programmer. And Robot Studio is good for both beginning robot programmers and for people who are very, very, very experienced with robot programming. But it's there to make your life easy all the way through the process, from concept through execution and even operation. So basically, it's a software package that allows you to work offline on a computer instead of at the robot, to do programming, upload, download programs, troubleshoot programs, design, and we're going to touch on a lot of those things today. It also incorporates some, now that, computers have come so far, some of the virtual reality and augmented reality features that are available are very recent with the advent of smarter and faster computers. And Robot Studio, it's very, very cutting edge in the way it's kept up with the industry, and also with some of the features that it's incorporated that take advantage of what's happened with computers and gaming and things like that recently. Okay, so I'm going to play this little movie. One of the things about Robot Studio is that in Robot Studio, there's a physics engine. And if you can see the boxes that are coming down the conveyor here, we're actually using the physics engine in Robot Studio to determine where that box falls. If the box were to fall on the floor and bounce away, it would look very natural. So one of the things that's happened with Robot Studio in the last 10 years is that the simulations themselves have become almost photorealistic. I mean, look at the shadow of the robot on the floor, the way the boxes behave. We can even do cable management on the robot. It'll simulate the cables moving around. It's a very, very high-end software from the actual motion performance. So when you open up Robot Studio, like, how do you use it? And one of the things that you do is, the first thing you do is you go into Robot Studio. First of all, you can download Robot Studio for free from our website. If you just go to ABB Robot Studio and Google, you'll come to the download page, and you can download it for free for 30 days at full version. So all of you are welcome to try this. Once you've installed Robot Studio, you would open up a new station, and this would be an empty station. And then you go into Robot Studio, and you could choose, you know, any one of these robots. Can you guys see my mouse on the screen, Molly?
Yes.
Okay, so you would open up an empty station here, and then you could choose, well, this is the robot that I want. And then you can also choose positioners, tracks, any of the other things that we have in our equipment libraries. And you can dump all of these things into your empty station and build your cell virtually. And this is before you've ever had to drill a hole in the floor or before you've ever even ordered the robot. So one of the great things about Robot Studio is that you can use it to figure out what's the most appropriate robot in this application. Where should the robot be relative to the printing press or relative to the CNC machine that I'm going to be using. And you can create your cell completely virtually so that by the time you actually put it together in real life, there are no surprises. So it really makes things very streamlined, and you don't want to have any, you know, big mistakes, right? I mean, once you start drilling holes in steel, you better have pretty much figured out where everything is going to go. Offline programming, in addition to selecting the robot and selecting the other equipment and figuring out where that goes in the cell, you can actually program the robot. And Robot Studio has what's called a virtual robot controller. So when you program the robot in Robot Studio, it's the same as programming the robot standing in front of the robot on the floor. Everything you can do, with very few exceptions, in front of the robot, you can do in Robot Studio. So I can actually not only simulate the physical layout of the cell, but I can actually write robot code and see what's going to happen with the robot in real life. Again, before I've ever even bolted the robot to the floor. If I want to know, for example, if I'm going to make rate, you know, what's my throughput going to be with this layout? Do I need one robot or do I need two robots? Do I need a shorter conveyor? Do I need a longer conveyor? Do I need more accumulation in the system? All of that I can do in Robot Studio just as if I had the real system sitting right in front of me. Geometric modeling. So in addition to the ABB libraries with our data, you know, obviously our robot models, our conveyors, that kind of stuff, you can bring in your own library. You can create your own libraries with your own equipment. So for example, let's say this was a CNC machine that you bought from Haas, and you went to Haas and said, hey, can I have a solid model of that machine? You could bring that solid model into Robot Studio and plunk it down on the floor right next to the robot and have everything be to scale. You can also create your own, there are tools where you can create your own models, and including smart models. You can actually create models where the doors open and close, the grippers open and close. So all of that is possible. In addition, it supports pretty much every kind of CAD format you can think of. Aegis, Step, SolidWorks, Pro Engineer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Some of those are native to Robot Studio, and then some of them, if you really want to use all the features, for example, of CATIA, you would need to get the CAD converter package that comes along with Robot Studio, and there's a charge for every one of those things. I think this is a good time to mention the way that the Robot Studio subscription model works is that when you download Robot Studio, you get it free for 30 days. And then if you want to continue to use it, it's not a purchase price, which would be very high. It's a very large and sophisticated chunk of software. We lease it as a $1,500 a year, more or less, subscription. And there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, it keeps the cost competitive. And then secondly, it allows you to have forward compatibility. So every 6 months, there's a major release, an update to Robot Studio. And then outside of that, there are bug fixes and other things that get introduced at other times. But as long as you've got a valid subscription, you will have a current copy of the software. So it's both forward and backward compatible. So smart components I mentioned briefly. In addition to importing, let's say, this gripper from Shunk, you can actually import the gripper and then give it properties and animate the gripper so that it works the way it really would in real life, which provides a very realistic simulation environment. How does Robot Studio work? Well, one of the things that makes Robot Studio work is that the ABB robots have some features called True Move, Quick Move, where the robot path and our path planning in the robot is very, very good. so that by, the simulation environment is perfect. And you want to make sure that the robot is as perfect as you can make it. So in general, ABB robots do what you tell them to do. If you're programming an ABB robot, what you program is what you get. So the disparity between the virtual path and the real path is as small as possible. There are some additional types of calibration and things that you can do. We have something called absolute accuracy, where we actually laser calibrate each robot, and that makes the robot as close to the ideal robot as possible. So for example, let's say you were going to use Robot Studio as your primary means of programming offline to online, and you wanted to import those programs to the robot with as little touch up as possible. Having a robot that's calibrated as an absolute accuracy robot means that the real robot and the virtual robot are going to be identical. So I can bring those programs to the robot without having to do touch up. That would be very important, for example, in a laser welding application where path is everything. There are other applications where that absolute accuracy calibration would not be required. Or if you're using Robot Studio to do layout geometry and things like that, but you're going to be touching up the programs at the machine anyway, then you also wouldn't need to have that absolute accuracy calibration. But in general, it's the path performance of the robot, the ABB robot, that allows the offline to online model to work very, very well with ABB. In addition to programming the robot, you can do editing and debugging. So let's say I were to program the robot standing at the robot, and I go through and I'm using the teach pendant to jog the robot around and save the points. When I'm all done doing that, I can upload that program into Robot Studio and it will display all of the rapid code. So I don't even need to know how to write rapid. Okay, rapid is our programming code, and that's, robot geeks and programmers all know how to look at that and say, oh yeah, I can program this. I'm a sales guy. I don't speak rapid. I mean, I do a very little bit, just enough to be dangerous, I guess. But even I can jog the robot around and save a bunch of points. And then when I upload that into Robot Studio, all of that rapid code has been created for me and displayed. And then if I want to make changes to that, there are very powerful syntax editors and things like that that I can use. So again, if I'm not the world's best robot programmer, I can still use Robot Studio as a very helpful tool to allow even me, to program a robot and to make it work the way I want it to work. If you're a really good robot programmer, it's much easier to sit and type code into your laptop than it is to stand there at the robot and do it with the flex pendant. So even the good robot programmers use Robot Studio as their programming tool for the most part. Almost every customer we have can benefit from using Robot Studio in some way. So in addition to the programming, you can do other things with Robot Studio. Because there's a graphical component, you can see things that aren't there in real life. And one of the things we have in the robot now is something called Safe Move, where you can program zones around the robot where you want to tell the robot, hey, don't violate this boundary. And even though in the real world, I can't see that in the cell, okay, because it's a virtual wall, I can see it in Robot Studio. So Robot Studio is required as a Safe Move programming tool to be the visualization tool for programming Safe Move. And again, it makes commissioning much, much easier, even with things like Safe Move. Integrated Vision can be programmed with Robot Studio. So if you buy the robot with ABB Integrated Vision, which is our camera software, the calibration and everything else all comes up in Robot Studio, and you can use Robot Studio as the vision training tool for the robot as well. I'm skipping over some of this stuff just because I want to get to some of the other stuff at the end. So virtual commissioning. So this is kind of what I talked about, where, let's say you order the robot and the robot's going to arrive in 10 weeks, from the integrator. So either as the integrator or as the customer, you can have that robot cell created virtually, and you can start writing programs for your parts, doing virtual commissioning on your part, just like you would be if you were standing in front of the robot. And that saves you a lot of time. From the day that robot arrives and gets bolted to the floor, you will be in production almost immediately. So you can do things in parallel. So virtual prototyping and testing. The movie's running it, right, Megan? Or Molly, brother?
I'm sorry. Yes, it's working.
It's running. It's running.
So you can see here that, you know, this is the simulated version of this cell, and this is the real life version of this cell. And it was programmed and simulated in Robot Studio, and all of this geometry was brought in as a CAD model. And then this was programmed in Robot Studio, and that program was then dumped into the real robot. And you can see they're almost right on top of each other. Now, why aren't they exactly on top of each other? Well, probably because when I did the simulation over here, we have to do things like we make assumptions about the dwell time for closing the gripper. You know, when I wrote the program, I said, oh, well, you know, I'm going to allow a quarter second for the gripper to actuate. And those little things can add up and create error. But once I've actually programmed the robot over here, I can actually then take the real robot and upload that program into Robot Studio and get the two things as close to being identical as possible. But even so, you know, this is very, very tight. So if I was doing this to say, okay, I need to get to 14 parts a minute with this application, and by developing this application in Robot Studio, I not only figure out what my layout is, where the robot has to be relative to all of this geometry, but I would be able then to tell, you know, to say, yes, I can get to 14 parts a minute, or no, I can't get to 14 parts a minute. And if I can't get to 14 parts a minute, you know, maybe I could move the conveyor a little bit closer to the target. Maybe I could move the robot a little closer to the pickup point. You know, make those changes in Robot Studio. It's a hell of a lot easier to make those changes in Robot Studio in the virtual environment than it is to try to do that in real life by moving the robot a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, right? So it's a huge boon to people who are you know, concepting their layout. So in addition to just the, you know, CAD type functions, Robot Studio does some really cool new tricks supporting AR and VR. And at first when these came out, I thought, oh, well, you know, I'm not a gamer. I don't use Oculus Rift. You know, these things aren't really necessary. But it turns out they're really cool, and they do provide some real life feature benefit type stuff. So by having a VR environment, you can wear this kind of an Oculus headset. And these headsets have gotten very, very cheap. For several $100s, you can go and buy a headset on Amazon that will work with Robot Studio. And some of the things those allow you to do are to look at the robot in the virtual environment. And let me just show you here. So for example, this part doesn't really exist. All of this was created in Robot Studio, but this is a real person. And the person is wearing a VR headset. And this is what the person would see. So in his headset, he's actually seeing that part, and he can load that part into the machine. Now that machine also does not exist, but by wearing the headset, you can actually physically walk around in your cell. We used this one time for a customer, Pratt & Whitney, where they had a space on their floor and they wanted to see what the machine would look like sitting on their floor. And we actually were able to have the manager put on a virtual headset and walk around the cell, which hadn't even been built yet, on his factory floor and see how it would fit. It was unbelievable. As a sales tool, that's pretty powerful. But if you're managing a business and you want to see, you know, hey, you know, I don't want to have any mistakes here. Let me actually just see how this is going to fit. Let me walk around the cell and look at it, you know, before I've even ever written the PO. You can do that with Robot Studio. It's really cool. So then there's also, so that's virtual reality. Then there's also augmented reality. And I'm going to jump ahead here. But what augmented reality allows you to do is, for example, in this video, this is really our factory. And these really exist. And you can see there's nothing over here. But in Robot Studio, using augmented reality, not only do these really exist, but now these robots, which don't really exist, now show up in my view, and I can actually see these robots moving the way that I have programmed them to see what's going to happen and where they are. So they're not really there, but oh my God, you put the goggles on and they're there. So it's just really cool. And you can also do that with, you've got a real robot, but you don't have a gripper. So we have one demonstration where the robot is there and moving, but there's nothing on the end of the robot. You put the goggles on and all of a sudden, all the tooling that you've designed is suddenly there. and you can see if your tooling works the way that it should. Very, very cool. So virtual meeting, there's another sort of VR component to Robot Studio, which is a networking component. So let's say you as the integrator are in Pennsylvania and your customer is in Tennessee, and you've built this cell and you both want to have a meeting about how things are working. And what this shows is that you've got the red Oculus and the blue Oculus here. You can be in Robot Studio. You don't have to be wearing an Oculus. You can be sitting and looking at your computer monitor. But this is me and this is him. And we can be walking around the cell together and pointing at things and making notes and talking about things and having a virtual meeting where we're both present in front of the cell, which again, may not have even been built yet. And actually have an engineering meeting virtually online using Robot Studio. It's very cool. You know, there are other CAD programs other than Robot Studio that allow you to do things like build cells. I mean, you might have, you know, Robot Master or Mastercam or any one of the other third-party cells that are out there. And how is that different? And I would say that how it's different is that Robot Studio is an ABB only product. So I guess the bad news about Robot Studio is that if you have a brand X robot, you cannot use Robot Studio to program that robot. It has to be an ABB robot. But Robot Studio being an ABB product, the path control and the path performance and the models and all of that stuff that are in Robot Studio for ABB robots are ABB property. They're not just, you know, reverse engineered. There are kinematic models, are dynamic models. So if, for example, if throughput is really, really important, and it's very important that you get to 38 parts per minute, you know, the thing about simulation is that in a lot of simulation packages and software, I can tell the simulation how fast to run. And in Robot Studio, if the robot can't do it, you can't do it in Robot Studio, you know, and vice versa. If you can do it in Robot Studio, you can do it on the real robot. So it really is a test of how that's going to work in real life. It's not just a simulation. So one of the things you can do without even having Robot Studio with this AR function is you can go, if you've got an iPhone or an iPad, you can download the Robot Studio AR viewer from the iOS App Store. And you can do just what I was showing you. Instead of a pair of goggles, it'll show up on your phone. And you can actually open up your phone, open up the app, and you can drop a robot on your floor at home. And you can actually control that robot as if it were sitting in front of you. You should try it. It's really cool. And for the sales guys that may be on the presentation, it's a really cool sales tool as well, if you haven't played with it. So some other cool things that have come up lately with ABB offline programming, one of them is Wizard Easy Programming. So we've got a product launch coming up on February 25th. If anybody's interested, you can go to LinkedIn and there should be some email announcements coming out where we're launching a new robot at the end of this month. And one of the things that that robot can do is use this Wizard Easy programming software. So remember I said Rapid is the ABB programming language, and even I'm not very good at that. I mean, that's not my job. So I'm not a robot coder. Well, Wizard Easy Programming uses this Blockly language from Google, which allows you to use color-coded function blocks and drop them into an application on the Robot Flex Pendant, but you can also do it in Robot Studio, so that I can very quickly program a robot and get it to do things without really being a robot programmer. It's very user-friendly. You know, it's sort of a, you know, even a 5-year-old child could do it kind of thing is what they tell me. And we'll see if I'm as smart as a 5-year-old child. But in addition, once you've programmed the robot using this easy programming method at the robot, if you were then to upload that program into Robot Studio, you would see all of the Rapid code and the text editor as if you had programmed it line by line in Robot Studio or in Rapid. Some other things that are newer in Robot Studio, so like for picking applications where you're doing high-speed picking. High-speed picking is a great robot application. ABB's got these really cool Delta robots that go very fast, up to 200 picks per minute. But you know, things can also go wrong in a hurry, right? If you have misjudged something. So by having this high-speed picking simulation in Robot Studio, you can actually look at, you know, part flow and really do a very good simulation of real-world conditions to make sure that that's going to work again once you've built it in real life. Pickmaster Twin. So we call it digital twinning. So the kinematics in Robot Studio and the kinematics of the real robot are identical. So Pickmaster Twin is just a way of using that with these very high-speed robots, again, to make sure that you've done a very good job of developing the application offline prior to doing it in real life, and it can save you a lot of grief. And that's really it. I just wanted to go sort of through all of the, feature benefit applications of Robot Studio, talk about the ability to simulate things, do offline programming. And so what you can see is that Robot Studio works through every stage of the robot's life cycle, from doing an initial reach study and choosing the right robot, to then bringing in the other portions of the cell and laying out the cell and making sure that everything's going to fit, to then programming the robot and making sure that you can meet cycle time and rate, and that your tooling works and that you don't have any collisions, to then actually programming the cell in real life, taking the program that you've created in Robot Studio and actually uploading that to a real robot. And then beyond that, the ability to take that program with any changes you've made to the real robot and to bring that back into Robot Studio to make them match. Robot Studio provides an incredibly powerful and useful tool to make your life easier through all phases of the process of trying to implement automation. And I think I'll leave it there and see if anybody has any questions. How do we do on time, Molly?
Great. We've still got a few minutes left. So there aren't any questions in the Q&A box. So I'll invite anyone that has a question to go ahead and put that in there. And in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and thank you, Jim,
Let me point
for
out
this information. Go ahead.
This isn't my name and email address. I'm filling in today for Greg. So Greg is the Pennsylvania regional manager for ABB. I'm New England and New York, so I was just pinch hitting today for him. If you have questions, or if you want to, follow up with either Neff or with Greg directly, or with Molly, she can get you back to whomever you need to do. But if you want to take a screenshot of Greg's contact information, there it is.
Hey, Jim, one point, very good presentation, by the way. Just if you can briefly expand upon your unique position of Made in America and how the lead times tend to work, because that's an additional thing that I think differentiates you that might round out your presentation well.
Okay, sure. So ABB is the only robot manufacturer. ABB is a global manufacturer, and we have manufacturing in Sweden, in the US, and in China. We have 3 major factories. One of them is in Auburn Hills, Michigan, and we try to build in country for country. So we make not every robot in the United States, but a lot of the high runners get made in the US at the ABB factory. And we're talking, bearings up. We're not just doing late configuration or bringing robots from Japan and putting them in a yellow warehouse and then making changes to them before the customers order them. We're actually building robots to order in Michigan. So before we started doing that, some 8 years ago, if I were to order a robot that was coming from Sweden, for example, it would be a 6-week build plus 5 weeks on the boat in order to get the robot over. So lead times were typically 12 to 14 weeks. Now, lead times for US made robots are typically 6 weeks and even under. We've been able to deliver robots in as little as 3 to 4 weeks, built from scratch for a customer. That's not every robot. Typically, we will quote, 7 to 8 weeks, because we don't want every robot to be an emergency, right? But we certainly do offer the ability to get quick delivery robots out of the US factory, and we even actually do stock some of the robots we don't make in the US, we do stock in the US. Having said that, I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. Right now, globally, there's a huge problem with shipping. COVID has created a real problem with manning at the ports on both the East and West Coast of the United States. And there are a lot of ships that can't be unloaded right now. So deliveries are being affected not only for the robots coming from overseas, but also the parts for the US factory that we rely on, global manufacturers to provide our supply chain with. We can't even we're getting to the point where we're running out of some components and we can't get components because of the global shipping problem. And you'd say, well, okay, we could work around that by air freighting the parts in. The problem is COVID also has really impacted the airlines, and there aren't as many airplanes flying as there used to be, commercial flights. So air shipping has gotten both more hectic and more expensive. So typically, while we do have in the US factory the ability to deliver very quickly, some of that I've noticed in the last month is starting to be affected by the pandemic. Now, just like everything else in life right now that's being affected by the pandemic, as the pandemic starts to ease up, those things should be self-correcting, and I think, you know, will solve themselves.
Great, thank you. Well, we're wrapping up here. I don't see any questions, but there is still time to go ahead and submit a question. If you have one, feel free to do that. As I mentioned earlier, this was recorded. We will share this in a few days. So if there's anything you want to refer back to, you'll have the ability to do that. Thanks again to Jim for presenting, to Ben and John at NEF and NTMA for partnering with us on this. And thanks to all of you for jumping on. I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll right now. And again, it's just a few questions. Oh, do you have a comment, Jim?
I did not put the link up to download Robot Studio, but if you just type in ABB Robot Studio download in your Google web browser, it will take you right to the page where you can download Robot Studio for free for 30 days. And if you click on the help icon in Robot Studio, there are very good tutorials to get you started with how to create a new station, how to import a robot, how to set up your cell. So please feel free to look at that information. If you've got questions about that, NEF has guys that are getting up to speed on Robot Studio and can provide support. If you don't want to be the guy using Robot Studio, but you want NEF to do a simulation for you, that's a service they'll be able to provide. You can go to them and have them provide the simulation. Or if you need Greg at ABB and you want an ABB apps engineer to help you with your application, please reach out. Thank you guys very much for letting me do this today, and I hope everybody learned something.
Okay.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. I see that we're at time. If you want to finish the poll there, I'll leave that open for a moment, but thank you everyone for jumping on, and feel free to check out nwirc.org to see what other webinars and trainings we have coming up, including the one on March 16th, which is the final in our series that we mentioned earlier. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Molly?
Yes.
I'm glad that the training seems to have met everybody's expectations. I was hoping that you got out of this what